Well, hello, back again. I'm grateful that you are for another day in the Whole50 Bible study. Today is day 28. We are now solidly in the New Testament, and today we're looking at the story of Jesus, Mary, and Martha, which actually there are several stories in the New Testament about Jesus, Mary, and Martha. This one perhaps is the most famous out of all of them, and that is where we find ourselves today. If you've not already done so, I'm going to actually extend this for a few days because I haven't put them in the mail yet. So there's still time for you to get one if you have not yet donated at christtable.today, or if you've not even gone to our website yet and checked it out, then would encourage you to do so, because our next Bible study begins on Monday, May 17th, and would love to have you be a part of it alongside of us. Going to be a great journey looking at the food, feast, fast, fellowship opportunities in the New Testament. And so grateful that you, well, not just the New Testament, but the Old Testament as well. And grateful that you are there with us. And also grateful that you are here with us today as we look into the New Testament at Luke chapter 10. So why don't we just go ahead and jump right into the deep end here. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed them into her home. Her sister, Mary, sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. And so what we have here perhaps is a bit of tension while Martha deals with the food. Mary is listening to Jesus as he teaches. And Luke kind of paints this story in a way where we truly feel the tension between these two that are here, these sisters in Martha's home. Martha, the text tells us in verse 40, was distracted by the big dinner that she was preparing, emphasis on big, which means that it wasn't just Mary, Martha, Jesus, and their brother, who isn't listed here, but Lazarus, but it's likely that all of the disciples were also here as well. And so she's preparing a lot of food for a lot of people. And if you even with today's technology, have ever prepared a meal for 15 or so people, you understand how difficult that is to do. Imagine it without all the technology that we have here today. So Martha is in the throes of preparing all of that food. So she came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all of the work? Would you please tell her to come and help me?" This is why we feel that there is tension between Mary and Martha, because Mary, the story usually is told, is the one who is doing nothing but sitting on her backside listening to Jesus teach, while Martha is doing all the work. And Martha wanted some help doing some of the work from her sister. This was a patriarchal society. Mary's place would have been in the kitchen. Sorry, but that's just the way patriarchal societies worked, and that's the way this one worked as well during this time period. And so Martha really culturally has every right to come and ask for Mary to come and help with the food. Not just because she was a woman, but also because they're a guest in Mary and Martha's home. But the Lord answers in a way that perhaps was not immediately pleasing to Martha. He says, "My dear Martha, you're worried, you're upset over all of these details." Jesus validates her first, that you're worried, you're upset over all of these details. And that's understandable, Martha. But really, there's only one thing worth being concerned about, and Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Jesus doesn't rebuke her for the meal. Jesus doesn't rebuke her for the work. Jesus doesn't really even rebuke her for asking for assistance or expecting there to be assistance with the meal. What Jesus rebukes her for, pushes it back against here, is the word in my translation, is her concern. It's an odd word, concern. Why that word? Well, first, I want to point out here before we answer that question that it's clear that Martha and Mary utilized their home to do a lot of ministry. And I've written here to do more ministry than many people maybe even most people. And so Mary and Martha was always opening their home and their table to Jesus and to others. I pointed out a few days ago that Mary and Martha stayed at home while many other people traveled and followed Jesus, and that was what they did as followers. They followed him physically. But Mary and Martha actually stay home, and they open up their home to other people, assumedly, but they also open up their home to Jesus. And so Mary and Martha's home, which is in Bethany, which is just outside of Jerusalem, is the place where Jesus stays. It was his home away from home, the place where he often went. Emmanuel, good to see you here, buddy. Hope you're doing well. Looks like surgery went well for you, but we're praying for you and cheering for you. You guys, actually, now that I think about it, Emmanuel, you open up your home to other people and use your home as ministry. And so Martha and Mary here are using their home for ministry. And I wonder how many of us think of our home as being a tool to minister to other people. I wonder how many of us think of our tables, which is what Martha is doing here. Think of our tables as being an opportunity to minister to other people. Now, I know that COVID has maybe thrown a wrench into that for a lot of us, but maybe rather than seeing it as no, I can't, I shouldn't, I have to worry about COVID and other people, maybe this has been the reset that all of us needed to say, our homes really can be places where we can meet God. We don't have to sit in a pew in order to meet God. Maybe that can happen in our home. And maybe also our home can be used as a tool for ministry, where we don't have to necessarily go to a food kitchen or go to a house building site or go to a homeless shelter or go to another country in order to do ministry. Not that any of those things are necessarily wrong in and of themselves, but maybe you can do ministry out of your house. Maybe it can be the place where ministry is done. And more directly to this passage, maybe your table can be the place, inviting people to your table whenever it becomes safe and advisable for you to do so. Maybe COVID is the necessary restart and rethink for you to be able to begin to utilize and centralize the table. Martha and Mary do that, and they are on record as being Jesus' home away from home, where Jesus went to have a home-cooked meal. They end up, Martha here actually, a little later in the story, whenever Lazarus is raised from the dead, Martha makes a proclamation about Jesus being the Son of God, which is only parallel and equal to essentially Peter's statement about Jesus being the Son of God. And so Martha, we have looked down upon for a really long time, I think, in the church, and erroneously so. Martha has a tremendous amount of faith. Martha opened up her home for Jesus, opened up her home for the disciples, opened up her table, prepared food for them regularly so that they could have a home-cooked meal, allowed Jesus, when he was an enemy of the state of Jerusalem, to come and teach out of her home, which puts her and her family and her home in the crosshairs of the religious leaders of the day. And Martha is the one who makes essentially a statement that is equal to Peter's about Jesus being the Christ, being the Son of God, from a woman in a patriarchal society. Which brings me to my second point, and I think why the word that Jesus used is concerned, why he laser focuses in not necessarily on the broader things that we've talked about Mary's place was in the kitchen. Mary should have been helping Martha. Martha was wrong in expecting her to do that. Not necessarily so, but it was the concern. What was concerned? Well, Mary was concerned that, that Martha was concerned that Mary shouldn't be sitting at Jesus' feet. not because of the meal, but because she was a woman. And so I think that whenever we read this passage, what we see or what we feel immediately is a tension between Martha's the hard worker, always doing things, always using her hands, and that Jesus kind of rebukes her for that, and that Martha has rebuked Mary for not doing that. I don't necessarily think that's the wrong understanding of this passage, but I don't think that that's the best understanding of this passage. And essentially, primarily based on that word concern and based on what we know about Jesus loosening the reins that the culture and the society had on women in that day. I think it's better to see this passage as a commentary on Mary being a disciple of Jesus as a woman, and Mary as a woman learning from Jesus in a place that is equal to men. You see, in those days, why I say it's a patriarchal society, in those days there was a portion of the house that was the women's portion of the house, and there was a portion of the house that was the men's portion of the house. For the women, it was the kitchen was one of those places. And so it would have been expected culturally for Mary and Martha to be in that place, especially whenever there's a big dinner about to be served to a very important rabbi and his disciples. Where Jesus and Mary find themselves is in the public portion of the house, which would have been the men's portion of the house. And so Jesus comes in, and before dinner, he's teaching the men. This would have been essentially off limits to women. It would have been off limits for women to be there listening. But Mary also, her posture also indicates that she's a disciple of Jesus, that she essentially was equal to one of the 12. So not only is she in the wrong place at the wrong time, but she is also assuming the wrong position at the wrong time. And so it's just as right that Martha is concerned about needing a little bit of help as it is that Martha is concerned that Mary has crossed a cultural line with Jesus, that Mary has put herself as a female in a place where a male should have been, and that Martha is almost coming to rescue Mary from this with the excuse that there's a lot to do for this dinner. Mary, I'm working myself to the bone here to get this big dinner ready for these people. Come and help me out with this dinner, Mary. Almost giving an excuse to Jesus to say, yeah, Mary, why don't you go and do that, so that he doesn't have to call Mary out in her own home for a woman being in a place that men should have been in. Jesus validates her concern. He doesn't invalidate Martha's work. He doesn't invalidate Martha's work that she's done towards the meal for wanting Mary. But what he invalidates is that Mary's better place is in the kitchen than it is at his feet. And what he's doing here is essentially broadly invalidating the greater idea that a woman's place is better in the kitchen than it is with the men. Jesus is doing this all the time with women. Sometimes it's super visible in the text, and other times you just have to kind of understand the culture in order to see it in the text. But it's absolutely clear that Jesus did not hold women to a different standard, or to different boundaries, or to different leadership roles than he did men. And neither did Paul. And the places in the New Testament where we utilize in order to place women underneath men in the church, in leadership roles, is just plain sinful and evil. It is. I grew up in those cultures in church, in those methodologies and ideologies in church. I understand. I have argued the opposite of that for more of my life, probably, than the opposite. The truth of the matter is, I was wrong. And on the basis of passages like this, whenever we demean or displace women from the place that Jesus allowed them to be and gave them honor and support for being, it's sin and it's wrong. Jesus had a radical view of women for his day. And the truth of the matter is, sadly, when we even look at today, 2,000 years later, even in religious circles and in the church, Jesus's views on women are still radical compared to what we as a church tend to allow and the place where we've relegated women to. And I think Jesus is concerned. Jesus is concerned not about all of the things that women have to do and all of the things that men have to do and all of the things that the work that the church has to do. But Jesus is concerned that we would think that a woman's place was somewhere else other than being allowed to sit at his feet in the posture and the place of a disciple, shoulder to shoulder with the 12. And I'll give you this one for free. If you think that Jesus would say something different about women being in the pastorate, shoulder to shoulder, or in the place of other men, you've got some real study to do in the New Testament and the culture of the first century and Jesus' radical view of women. I'll give you that one for free. Until tomorrow, happy reading.